All right. I think we got ones got back to class like they need to be. Thankful for y'all sticking around, continuing our lessons through the parables. So we'll go to Luke chapter 12. We're going to be talking about the parable of the rich fool. Luke chapter 12. We'll be looking there beginning in verse 13. So again, thank y'all for sticking around and hope that these lessons are beneficial to you. As always, anything that you need from me, any kind of notes or slides or anything, I'd be happy to give you that, whatever you may need. Luke chapter 12. Well, let's begin by reading the parable. Kind of not too lengthy, but a little bit lengthy. But we're going to look at the context of what's going on here and get into the parable as well when we begin there in verse 13. And then we'll begin to dissect this and see how it applies to us today. So beginning there, Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 13, and one of the company said unto him, Master, speak to my brother, that he divide the inheritance with me. And he said unto him, Man, who made me a judge or a divider over you? And he said unto him, or unto them, Take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. And he spake a parable unto them, saying, The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully, and he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, because I have no room where to bestow my fruits? And he said, This will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all of my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and not rich toward God. So again, the importance of the parable, we're going to get into that. Again, I know I made mention of that in the worship hour. We're going to talk about the idea of laying up the treasures here. What good does it do? So let's look at this man. So again, looking there in verse 13 when he's talking about it, and something that we want to pull from this, the one of the company said to him. So this company, your Bible may translate that a crowd, or the people that were following him in that. So sometimes not the same way in which we use company, but the crowd that was gathered around him, one of them came up to him, and it seems that he's saying, Master, speak to my brother that he might divide the inheritance with me. So it appears that I think that both the brothers were present in this. It may not lead to that. It seems like he's saying, speak to my brother, like the brother was there, but maybe he was not. But I think that he was. So let's begin to look at this and the idea of dividing this inheritance. He says that he divide the inheritance with me. So when we go back to Deuteronomy chapter 21 and verse 17, for those who have been here on Wednesday nights for the Deuteronomy class, the idea that the oldest son would get the double portion. So we see that kind of talked about through the Old Testament. That's nothing unfamiliar to the Bible student. Again, we think about like Jacob and Esau, that the birthright, that he would get the double portion. So even in Deuteronomy 21 and 17, it talks about how even if the man had multiple wives and the wife was not favorable, still the firstborn got double portion. That was just the way it was. That was the law that God had given, that 2/3 would go to the firstborn and 1/3 of the property would go to the younger son. So that was the importance there with Jacob and Esau, and how Esau was a profane man because he was going to get a double portion. But he counted it for nothing. He just said, I'd rather have this soup than the double portion. So the profanity, the profane, he counted it for nothing. So that's why we get that, because it was such an inheritance that he was able to get. Now again, I believe, there's some viewpoints. I'll let you kind of determine what you may think that this would be. But I believe that the younger brother was wanting the older brother maybe to divide the inheritance evenly. Right? Then maybe it's kind of like Carson and Charlie, and they come and they say, hey, look, we're both we're both mine and Brittany's sons. Surely we could just have this evenly. So it might be that he wanted it divided evenly through this. It might be that the older brother was not giving the younger brother his lawful share. I never really thought about that. I always thought that the younger brother, all right, he just wanted to make it fair, right? That's what I hear at the house. And I had a school teacher back home. He would always tell us that the fair was something that came to Lawrenceburg in the fall. And then he'd say, well, that's not fair. He said, that's the fair's that comes to Lawrenceburg in the fall. That's not had anything to do with this. So he would say, I want it to be fair. But it might be, again, that both brothers being present, and the older brother maybe saying, I'm not ready to give you that inheritance just yet. Maybe a thought. I have never interpreted it that way. But that may be the case. So what's the answer then to this? So again, the background to what's going on to this parable are this one brother in particular, maybe between the two of them, saying, look, I want more. Either I want my inheritance. But it seems that he says, because he said, divide the inheritance, again, might be leading that he's not divided it yet, even his third, or he may be wanting to divide it in half. But he's looking for that inheritance for him. So Christ asked him, and we're going to look at this word, and he said unto him, man, who made me a judge or a divider over you? So let's look at the idea of judge. Again, coming from that, one who presides over and decides cases in court. So it's very similar to what we would think today. But again, this man is kind of asking Christ to take on this role that he's not really there to do. That's what's important through this lesson, or what he's trying to get at with this man is worried about these trivial things of this life, and Christ is going to tell him, again, that's the purpose of the parable, you're worried about these material things when that stuff doesn't really matter. Excuse me, I was very glad that I made it through my sermon without having to get a drink of water, but I don't think I'm going to make it through the class. Okay. So the idea of the judge. All right, and also what about a divider? So the idea, all right, you're going to judge over this, you're going to make this rule, but the divider would be someone, again, an apportioner, an administrator. And that's kind of the word that you're looking at there. So Christ, again, essentially asking, you're coming up to me with this case about getting an inheritance. And when he says man, don't think that as being like disrespectful. That's just kind of like us just, speaking today. He's not like saying it mean when he says man, who had made me a judge. He's just kind of addressing that man like sir, like what we would say today. So don't take that the wrong way. So he's saying like essentially, sir, who made me a judge or a deliverer over you? So who has put me in this position, right? Who has put me in the position of a judge and an apportioner to make sure that I'm handling this affair that's going on in your family? That's not really why I am here. So he goes on to tell them there, again, who gave me the right to settle the arguments between you and your brother. That's what Christ is kind of essentially saying in this matter. I'm here to be doing the work of the Lord, or the work of God, and I'm trying to teach you these things, and here you are. I don't really have the right anyway, because really, he was just a teacher. He didn't really have the judicial type of thing, but I guess that man was trying to say, hey, here's Christ. Let's see what he has to say about these things. I don't think he was trying to trap him or anything like that. I think he was sincere, the man was, to the idea of just saying, I need my inheritance, or I need it divided, or whatever the case may be. All right, so look what Jesus tells the man as well. And he said unto them, as he goes on, he said, who's made me a judge and a divider over this matter, right? Over you. Verse 15, and he said unto them, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not of the abundance of the things which he possesseth. So a man's life. So this idea of covetousness, we really got scolded at school. That's not covetous, it's covetousness. They really got you hard on that. Covetousness. So what does that word actually mean? This is interesting. Again, you got the Greek strong word up there, the Greek behind it, the state of desiring to have more than one's due. So that's important because as Christians, we don't need to have the mentality that because I'm a Christian, I can't have anything. We don't need to say that. The idea, again, it goes back to even what we talked about at the beginning or in our worship hour, that as long as I'm putting God first and Christ first in my life, if I've got a big house and a lot of stuff, that's okay because of what? I'm putting Christ first. But the covetousness is the idea of having more, right? You got it. I want it. I don't like that you have it. I want more. Covetousness. So we've got to be careful about that. We're going to talk about the danger of that here in just a moment. So Christ says, don't be covetous. Because again, notice what he says, a man's life, so his being, what makes a man himself there, it's more than what I possess. So that's beautiful. Now, it seems to be, again, that Jesus knew that greed would be the root of what he was requesting, either because he wanted more of his portion, right? He wanted it divided in half, or because he was wanting his portion right then, that greed was in this. So he warns the crowd. Again, Christ being the master teacher here, taking this opportunity. Here's a man so focused on this, and I'm sure most people were kind of curious of how Christ would say about this. So what does he do? He teaches the parable. Because he understands that greed was going to be the thing that was going to be causing him to do this. So here's the parable. Again, the idea that the ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully, and he thought within himself, and we're going to get to that here in just a moment, what shall I do? I have no more room where to bestow my fruits. And he says, this will I do. I will pull down my barns, and I will build greater or bigger barns, and there I will bestow all my fruits and my goods. So the fruits and goods, not just it would be his crop. So don't think about it like my crop and my material blessings. It seems to lean, even in the Hebrew or the Greek there, to the idea of all of his crop. And I will say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But interesting, again, here's the parable. But God said unto him, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be, which hast provided, which thou hast? So again, this man is laying up all of this stuff. So he that layeth up treasure for himself and not rich toward God. So we want to understand this whole idea. This is the context of what's going on. These people were focused with the material, and Christ is saying, listen to this. Listen to this man that focused his entirety of his life on his riches. So let's kind of get into this. Why did he want to tear down his barns? So this was an interesting, again, I'd always just kind of assumed the man said, all right, I've got such a, I guess we would call bumper crop, right? He's got such a crop, and that he says, I've got to tear down my little buildings, and I've got to build bigger buildings. So instead of building additional barns to what he had already had, he planned to tear down the old barns to make room for larger ones, and thus retain all of the present agricultural land for his crops. And I guess I had never really thought about that. Why didn't he just build additional barns? But the man is greedy. And if he builds other barns, then he is not able to retain the amount of ground that he can produce these crops with. So you see the double-edged sword with that. So he says, all right, I don't want to get rid of any of my cropland because I'm doing so good with all this. My little barns aren't enough. Let's tear them down and let's build some bigger ones. But another viewpoint may be that he didn't plan to destroy the materials, that he essentially is going to take that barn down and he's going to use that material when he builds his newer barns with additional materials. So that's an interesting viewpoint one man had. Here's one that I never thought about either. That it ignores the problem that where he would store his crop when he was replacing his barn. So I thought that was really the nugget that I got out of that parable, probably to me, was that how did he know he had two little barns? Perhaps he was filling them up again. This is the parable. But it would almost make sense that the man was filling up the barns and he didn't have enough room. But where would he have stored all of his goods if he already had them in the barn? But again, his greed would not allow him to build additional barns because that would cut into his profit. So he kind of doesn't put that into the equation. Well, what do I do with all my food, my grains while I've got them to do that? So I thought that was kind of interesting. You can see the focus of this man, right? Maybe not practical in that sense, but maybe to the idea of, well, perhaps he was looking at his harvest and knew that he was not able to get the barns. But again, that's maybe reading a little too much into the parable that we don't want to get into. But nonetheless, the man is greedy. He is covetous. He sees that he has a bountiful harvest, so he's got to make more room. So interesting thoughts with that. So the man was a fool, and what we can get through the principle today for us is that he did not include God in his plans. Now notice, as we were reading that, the idea that he says, let's see. Yes, verse 19. And I will say to my soul, soul, thou hast much good laid up for many years. He didn't know how many years he had. And many times we find ourselves like that today, right? It's nothing wrong with making plans. Brittany and I, again, the holiday season coming up, we got plans, nothing wrong with that. But when we make the plans with the certainty that we're going to be able to do that, you really got to be careful with that. So what does he say? I've got so much goods. I mean, these goods have laid up for me for many years. Notice that again, take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. The ultimate idea of enjoying life, the eating, the drinking, and the being merry. So again, like a big feast. That's what he's going to be able to do. But interesting, he thought he was in control of his future. Many people look at that, and I know Brittany and I, we've talked about that with the decisions that we have made. Again, winding up here being one of those decisions. When you think about the plans that you have, right, you think God's just up there laughing because you think, oh yeah, I'm right in control, right? I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And so many times those are out the window. So we find, all right, to be God's will is what we really need to say. So the man was a fool. Why was he a rich fool? He didn't include God, and he thought he had control over his own life to the sense that he knew how many days, how many years that he was going to have. So that's why he's a fool. And we're a fool as well if we think that if we don't include God in our plans, and if we think that we're going to have a year or 2 or 5 or 10, we're foolish in that as well. Now, again, this is very important because we find these individuals like this today, that he thought he was in control and he didn't need God. I was talking to somebody the other day about that. We were up door knocking in Missouri, and a lady came out, and she had a very big, nice house. It was a very nice neighborhood, and she didn't have time for the gospel. And what they said, I don't need God. Why do I need God? And what we find is that's why it's hard, I think, in some ways, to preach the gospel in America, because we live in such a prosperous nation. And it's such a blessing to be in a prosperous nation and a free nation in which we live in. But we're so prosperous, we kind of get the idea, I've kind of done all of this without God. Why do I really need God? That's why when you go over to places like India and down into South America, the gospel really takes root because these people don't have anything. And they don't have anything to look forward to, really, except their family and some, things going on like that. So the idea of the gospel giving them a better home that they, and chase a rabbit for just a moment, but that's Hinduism teaches that if you are in a rich or in a higher up society, they still have the classes of people over there. So if you are in a higher class, in a rich class, it means that you have done so good that when you are reincarnated, that you live again in a rich like you lived before. So if you're poor, at some point in time in your life, you did some evil things and you're being punished. So for the poor in Hindu, the poor, when they die, all they have to look forward to is waking up, being, again, kind of coming back in that mindset and being poor again. So that's why the Gospels really catches on over there, because that teaches against that Hinduism to say, oh, you mean I can have a mansion in heaven one day and never have to work and never have to have any pain or suffering? Yes. But what we find is today, America, people that are living well, I say, I don't need God, I don't need the gospel. I'm doing fine right now. So some thoughts on that. So, again, too, he was a fool because he didn't think about people who were in need. If his barns were sufficient before to get him through what he needed to do, he may have had a neighbor, he may have had somebody in his community, a family, that could have used the extra grain instead of himself. So, interesting thoughts, again, to why this man was a fool. So, let's look at this and the lessons that we can learn. The world considered this man wise, right? We see people like that. He's always so productive. He's so good. He's producing so much stuff, and he's just growing leaps and bounds. And to the world, this man would have looked great and very wise, because he's like, all right, he's gonna tear down his barns. He's gonna put bigger ones. He's not cutting into his crop. So he said, this is a wise man. But more importantly, to God, this man was a fool. So in God's eyes, right, how do we measure up like that? Now, let's look at the covetous. So again, we kind of made the point of this, that covetousness is not just a possession of money. You can be a rich Christian, and as long as you're putting God first, you can be a rich Christian and do a lot of good for the kingdom of God. There's many men, you know them, right? Men and women who have been very blessed, And they're helping the church in many ways, and how great that is. Kind of the old saying, it'd be better if Christians had all the money, right? We could do all the good work for Christ like that, do all the good work for God. So there's nothing wrong with having money. Again, you go back to the love of money is the root of all evil, not money, the love of money. So important to note that one can be poor and be covetous. So covetous is not just for the rich man. A man can be poor and say, I've got, maybe I have enough, or maybe I want more, and I want what the other person has. So being covetous makes us focus on the worldly possessions, right? And when we talked about that in our lesson in the worship hour, what's our number one goal? If my number one goal is to have the biggest house in town, I'm not really focused on God, right? That's not my main, or that was my main goal, not. And again, if that's my goal, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure I got the biggest house in town. Notice this when we go to Colossians chapter 3, and we'll look at this here as we're getting to the close of the lesson. But the idea that when you talk about covetousness, that is linked in oftentimes with idolatry, and we're going to see some other ones that it's linked in with as well. Colossians, I know it's in here somewhere. All right, Colossians 3, 5 and 6. Notice, mortify. We talked about this in class this morning. Therefore, your members which are upon the earth. Now, notice what this is grouped in with: fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, covetousness, which is idolatry. For which things' sake the wrath of God cometh on the children of disobedience. So all of these things grouped in here together, but notice it's idolatry. And so many times we don't want to think about serving an idol. We think idol worship, right? That's not for today. But if we're covetous and we say this, whatever it is, you fill in the blank. If it's opposite of God, then it's idolatry. So you have Exodus chapter 20, verse 5. God is a jealous God. And then Matthew 6:24, we can't serve two masters. So if I'm trying to get the biggest house in Crockett County, but I'm still trying to serve God, I can't do both, right? I can't be actively trying to do all of those things to get the biggest house and actively trying to do exactly what God wants me to do in that. So again, we see that there in Colossians 3, 5 and 6. It's associated with fornication, drunkenness, and that's kind of that idea, is that it's unrestrained, right? That covetous is not that I can be content with what I have, and I'm thinking, all right, I've got everything I need, it's perfect. The idea of excess. So fornication, drunkenness, excess. I need more, and that's what we find this sin of covetousness being put in with. And again, if we're not careful, money cannot become our master. We need to make sure we're understanding that today. Okay, that's where we're at. I was thinking we were coming to the end. So we got a minute or two. Is there any questions maybe about that parable, or maybe about covetousness, or any comment or points you want to make? All right, I held you over a little bit in the worship hour, so I guess I'll give you a minute or two back. So anyway.